Bahamut is usually described as the ultimate summon, the strongest dragon, the last line of defense against evil. But that's not what he really is. He doesn't exist to save the world. He exists to hold it together. His function was never moral. It was ontological. In Final Fantasy, Bahamut is not defined by a single form, a single era, or a single rule set. He exists above systems. Whether he is called a summon, an aeon, an eidolon, a guardian force, a primal, or an icon, the function remains consistent. Bahamut represents the upper limit of power that a world can endure without collapsing. He is never introduced casually. Bahamut is almost always distant, restricted, optional, hidden, or narratively elevated. The series treats his presence as something that must be justified by scale. When Bahamut appears, the conflict has already surpassed ordinary stakes. Within the universe of Final Fantasy, Bahamut represents absolute defensive authority. Not protection in a moral sense, but protection in a structural one. He does not exist to preserve peace, innocence, or balance. He exists to prevent total failure. His role is to stand at the threshold where the world itself becomes vulnerable to erasure. That is why Bahamut is consistently framed as a king, a final summon, or a dominant force. Titles like King of Dragons are not decorative. They communicate hierarchy. Everything below Bahamut can fail. Everything below him can be replaced. Bahamut cannot. If he is invoked, it means the system has already exhausted every lesser safeguard. This is also why Bahamut is rarely compassionate. He does not guide humanity, forgive it, or correct it. He confronts threats that humanity can no longer contain on its own. When he fights, it is not heroism, it is containment. When he destroys, it is not cruelty, it is structural enforcement. Across the series, Bahamut functions as a living ceiling, a power that defines how far conflict is allowed to go before reality itself begins to break. Other summons express elements, emotions, or natural forces. Bahamut expresses limit. He is the point where power stops being a tool and becomes a burden the world can barely sustain. This is why Bahamut is almost never framed as hope. Hope implies a future shaped by choice. Bahamut appears when choice is already narrowing. His presence means the world is still standing, but only barely. In the universe of Final Fantasy, Bahamut is not the savior of the world. He is the reason the world is still there to be saved.
And only by the true king's hand can the immortal accursed be banished and the light restored to this world.
The name Bahamut does not originate in fantasy. It originates in medieval Arabic cosmology, where Bahamut is not a dragon, a god, or a warrior. He is a foundational being, a colossal creature whose role is to support the world itself. He does not judge, intervene, or destroy. He endures. If Bahamut fails, creation collapses under its own weight. This is not symbolism in the modern sense. It is structural cosmology. The world exists because something is bearing it. When Dungeons & Dragons adopts Bahamut, the myth is not preserved, it is re-engineered. The passive foundation becomes an active agent. Bahamut is transformed into the Platinum Dragon, a lawful good deity who chooses to defend the world. What was once neutral support becomes moral guardianship. The idea of holding the world survives, but it is reframed as protection through will, ethics, and judgment. This step is crucial. D&D turns Bahamut from a cosmological constant into a moral authority. Power is no longer something that simply exists. It is something that must be used correctly. Final Fantasy inherits neither version whole. Instead, it strips morality back out and reclaims function. Bahamut in Final Fantasy is rarely a god, and almost never a hero. He exists as a limit imposed on escalation. Sometimes he is a king, sometimes sealed, sometimes conscious, sometimes silent. But he is always positioned where lesser systems fail. The series keeps the Arabic idea of structural necessity and the D&D idea of active defense, but removes alignment and doctrine. What remains is a figure who represents the maximum power a world can tolerate without breaking. This lineage matters because it explains why Bahamut feels consistent across wildly different games. He is not recurring because he is popular. He recurs because he solves the same narrative problem every time: how to represent the final boundary between stability and collapse. He is there so the world does not fall apart the moment everything else fails. Across the Final Fantasy series, Bahamut's appearances are not random variations of the same creature. They are contextual deployments of the same function. Each major incarnation reinforces the same role. Bahamut emerges when the world requires a force capable of holding its structure together against existential threat. Bahamut is introduced as the King of Dragons, not as a battlefield force, but as an authority who can recognize worth and grant a transformative right. In narrative terms, he's an apex being who legitimizes the party's ascent. Power is not just taken, it is acknowledged by something older and higher than the human struggle around it. In Final Fantasy IV, Bahamut is presented as the apex of summoned power. While later materials describe him as the father or god of summoned monsters, the game itself places him outside the political hierarchy of the Feymarch, which is ruled by figures such as Asura and Leviathan. Bahamut is not aligned with any nation, pantheon, or ideology shown in the narrative. His authority is neither political nor theological, but hierarchical in terms of power and threshold. He defines the upper limit of summoning, a ceiling that no other summon can surpass. The implication is clear. When kingdoms, gods, and conventional structures of power are no longer enough, Bahamut marks the final, stable summit of what summoning itself can reach. In Final Fantasy V, Bahamut exists as a power deliberately removed from the flow of the world. He is sealed away, isolated, and absent from the central conflict. Not because he is irrelevant, but because his power exceeds what the world normally permits to circulate freely. His presence is not tied to the defeat of evil or the resolution of crisis. Instead, he stands apart, positioned as the upper boundary of what can be unleashed without destabilizing everything beneath it. When Bahamut is finally confronted, it is not framed as salvation, judgment, or destiny, but as contact with a force the world has chosen to restrain. Bahamut represents the idea that some power is not forbidden because it is evil, but because it is too great to exist unchecked. That idea returns in Final Fantasy VIII. Bahamut is not framed as an active protector, but as contained power. He exists sealed within the Deep Sea Research Center, a place abandoned for so long that its original purpose has been erased from memory. This matters. Bahamut is not guarding the world directly. He is removed from it, locked away at the bottom of the ocean, isolated, forgotten, and restrained by layers of artificial structure. The implication is clear. This is not power meant to circulate. This is power that the world chose to bury rather than risk. His encounter is not a call for help, nor a test of morality. It is a confrontation with something that was deliberately sealed because it exceeded what the world could safely integrate. Even in silence, even in abandonment, he fulfills the same function, acting as a ceiling. A force that exists beyond regular systems, kept dormant not because it failed, but because unleashing it would destabilize everything beneath it. In Final Fantasy X, the concept reaches its most literal expression. Bahamut is bound to a faith, acting as a conscious voice within a living dream. He is not merely a guardian, he is supporting the summoned existence of Dream Zanarkand. His presence confirms that Bahamut's function is not symbolic. He is a load-bearing force. Taken together, these appearances form a pattern. Bahamut is not defined by morality, allegiance, or even personality. He is defined by threshold. Each time he appears, the world has reached the limit of what lesser powers can endure. Each time he acts, he confirms the same truth. There is always a final line that must be held. Bahamut is that line. He is the structural protector, invoked only when the alternative is collapse. And every major appearance in the series exists to prove that point. There are moments in Final Fantasy when Bahamut does not appear as a safeguard, a limit, or a stabilizing presence. He appears on the opposite side. Not because his nature has changed, but because the world around him has. When Bahamut is positioned as an antagonist or an opposing force, the series is not declaring him evil. It is signaling that the structure he normally preserves has already been overridden by power, ambition, or fear. In these moments, Bahamut is no longer holding the line. He is being used to draw it. In Final Fantasy IX, Bahamut is deployed as an instrument of annihilation against Alexandria. What matters is not the destruction itself, but the inversion of his role. Bahamut is no longer the barrier preventing collapse. He becomes the mechanism through which collapse is enforced. Protection is replaced by execution. The same power that could have preserved the world is redirected to erase part of it. This reversal reveals a consistent rule. When Bahamut stands against the protagonists, the conflict is no longer about defeating evil. It is about confronting a world that has misaligned its highest power. The danger is not Bahamut's strength, but the fact that the system capable of restraining him no longer exists. In these portrayals, Bahamut becomes a warning rather than a solution. He shows what happens when absolute power is stripped of its regulatory function and reduced to command. The barrier does not fail, it is repurposed. And that is why these encounters feel different from ordinary boss fights. You are not overcoming a monster. You are facing the moment when the world has decided that preservation is no longer the priority. When Bahamut stands on the other side, Final Fantasy is not asking whether he can be stopped. It is asking whether the world that summoned him still deserves to be saved. In Final Fantasy, being stronger has never meant being higher in the hierarchy of meaning. Entities like Anima, or Knights of the Round, can surpass Bahamut in raw destructive force, but that superiority is precisely what disqualifies them from his role. Their power is excessive, not regulatory. Anima is born from unresolved trauma and sustained suffering, a force that exists because something in the world has already broken beyond repair. She does not stabilize reality. She exposes its failure. Her strength is not a ceiling, it is overflow. The Knights of the Round represent a different extreme. They are idealized, almost mythic intervention, power without context, without cost, and without integration into the world's structure. They arrive, act, and vanish. They do not hold anything together. They do not endure. They solve a moment, not a system. Bahamut exists in opposition to both. He is not defined by how much he can destroy, but by what he prevents from collapsing. Other forces may exceed him in violence, scale, or finality, but none of them occupy a sustaining position. Bahamut is the limit that allows such excess to exist at all, without tearing the world apart immediately. In Final Fantasy, absolute power is not the strongest force. It is the one that still leaves a world standing afterward.